Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, making the switch back to doing Christmas cards. As always, I'm all over the place. I've already posted a couple videos for this year's Christmas card series. I will have a link to that at the end of this video if you've missed them, because like I said, I jump all over. There is no set schedule. I've been doing fall cards, Halloween cards, and then my previous video, I used this bold leaves background stamp and my brain was just going and I started thinking, I was like, oh, emboss resist. And then I was like, ooh, Christmas colors. Let's do a Christmas card. So that's what I'm doing. So I have some Canson XL watercolor paper and I'm using my MISTI, and I took the foam insert out of my MISTI and I'm using one of my MISTI sticky grids to hold the watercolor paper. I love these sticky grids. I, for whatever reason, keep forgetting I own them. They're so handy. So it's holding the watercolor paper in place. And like I said, this is Canson watercolor paper. I have the smooth side of this watercolor paper facing up because, especially with an image like this that has a lot of solid area, it's not a line image, you want as smooth of a surface as possible. Now you could use hot press watercolor paper. That'll work just as well. I don't like hot press watercolor paper. I have some and it is fabulous. It frustrates me, honestly. So I like my Canson, I have done a bajillion videos using it. I'm comfortable with it. It works for me. So I purposely used my MISTI because I wasn't sure if I would have to re-stamp this multiple times, hence the MISTI, the sticky grid, all the things. Because again, stamping on watercolor paper, even though it's the smooth side, it's got a bit of texture to it and solid, yet detailed background stamp. But it stamped really well. It did help that I'd also just re-inked my clear embossing ink pad. And I'll have a link to that re-inker again with all the supplies. So my clear ink pad right now is super juicy. So it inked up, of course, the stamp wonderfully. It stamped perfectly. Everything was great. All was well. So after I'd stamped it, you saw me on screen. I used my anti-static powder tool before I even put the watercolor paper in my MISTI, and then stamped it with the clear embossing ink. And then I've coated all of this with clear embossing powder, tapped off the excess, and then melt with my heat tool. Most boring part ever, so I always edited that out of the video. It's not boring in real life, it's just boring on video. Like in real life, I'm always like, ooh. It's more exciting though when it's metallic embossing powder. When it melts and it gets shiny, it's like, yes. But even with clear, it's fun. Biggest thing though is obviously tilting it back and forth in the light, making sure there's no dull grainy areas. If there are, hit those with the heat tool so everything is melted and shiny and fabulous. So after I'd done that with these, I'm taping these down to a hardboard. This just helps prevent a bunch of warping. I don't mind if my cardstock warps or watercolor paper warps because it flattens out as it dries. However, when it does that, it starts, bowing up. Everything starts running off the sides. So taping it down prevents that, but it also does help keep everything flat, which just makes life easier. So I've taped these down, and then I pulled out 2 distress re-inkers because, as when my brain was like mulling ideas, I was thinking specifically, I was like evergreen bow and pine needles. I was like, yes, this needs to be, this is what it needs to be. You can use watercolors for this, anything really. The only thing to remember with distress ink re-inkers, if you're going to color with them like this, you need to make sure you have a good amount of water, because distress ink re-inkers are meant for ink pads. So there are additives in these that help keep your ink pads from drying out. So if you go in with too much re-inker and not enough water, it will, if you find that your whatever you've painted with it isn't drying, that'll be why. So I added, a little bit of the re-inker to my palette. I added a good amount of water. I sprayed these backgrounds before I even did that to make things move. And again, because these are like a lot of solid images, there's not a whole lot of room for the actual coloring, but that's fine. I just wanted that loose, bit of color. It gives it just that little bit of like organic sort of look to it, and it's easy. Like literally slap the color on, let it dry, call it a day, you know? After these were dry, and I did speed it up with my heat tool, you could totally let it air dry, but I'm impatient. Once these were dry, I just took a dry tissue, you could use a paper towel, just something dry, and I went over this, just lightly rubbed all over this, because again, those large, solid, heat embossed leaves, bits of the ink and water in that are sitting on top of that. So I just rub that tissue over that, it picks up all that ink, and then I'm good to go. So made sure all that was done. I made sure these backgrounds were completely dry before removing the tape, because if you see your, one, pull the tape against itself, and two, if you start seeing any tearing, make a stop, make sure it's dry, because if your watercolor background is still wet in any way, when you go to pull the tape off, it'll just start shredding the watercolor paper. So I think it covered all the bases with that. Now let's get on to the actual cards. So I trimmed these down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. That's like my go-to size now. I don't know. I've been obsessed with this for I don't even know how long. I just like it because it gives a good border around the A2 card base. So I trimmed them down, and I die cut some red cardstock with the CZ Design Mary word die. I love CZ Design's wafer dies. I like her stamps. I watch her videos. I need to like get back into her lives, all things. Kathy Zielski is just, I get a kick out of her, and I love her font choices. Anyway, I used that, and I stacked the 3 layers of the word die cut together with craft tacky glue because it gives it that dimension that I love. And then I had die cut the outline from vellum. So adhered the word to its little vellum outline. And then off camera, I trimmed down some of the sentiment strips from the Christmas Wishes pack. And I'll get back to that in a second. And then I'd also die cut some Altenew Dazzling Diamonds glitter paper. I showed this glitter paper in a haul video months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. I forget when I got it. It's very pretty. Online, it looks more silver. In person, it's more like white with silver. It's so pretty. You can kind of see it better in the photos at the end. And because even here on camera, it looks like everything's just kind of fading into each other, but that's more my lighting because I have really bright lights. But I die cut that glitter paper with one of the budding branches wafer dies. And then I adhered that to my background. And then I applied adhesive right behind the Mary word, making sure not to go past the letters so that you don't see that adhesive through the vellum. And then adhered that on top. And then, like I'd said, I trimmed down these sentiment strips. I chose the one that said, I think, Christmas Blessings. I just trimmed off just the word Christmas. And then I'm going to pop that underneath the Mary words with little thin foam squares. And I pulled up my reverse tweezers for this because my fingers and hands were getting in the way, you know, and I couldn't see what I was doing. And I was like, need to get this straight. So picked it up with my tweezers and then popped that into place so that these cards will say Merry Christmas. You could kind of leave that off because just the word Merry is more than enough, but I was just in that mood. I was like, no, it needs to specifically say Merry Christmas. So that's what I did. And then the other thing I did was I pulled out these little Studio Katia wine berry pearls. And I just thought those would be really cute to adhere on top of this little budding branches wafer die because it's got the 3 little berry spots. You could also die cut little circles of cardstock if you wanted, or I was like, oh, you could gently dab like a red Copic marker. That would work too, but of course I'm going to go with the pearls because, again, I've got lifetime supplies of all this stuff. So I adhered those into place with craft tacky glue. Plus I liked that little bit of red, you know, it goes with the sentiment. So card fronts are pretty much done. Got to do something on the inside. So I'd cleaned off the bold leaves background stamp. And my card bases are top folding A2 white note cards. And I used my piece of Post-it tape to mask off where the score line is so that the stamp doesn't go past the score line. And then I'm inking up the stamp with Simon's Aspen Positively Saturated ink. I know I could have used like the Distress ink in like Evergreen Bow or Pine Needles, but those are pretty dark inks for the inside of a card. Like I could have stamped it off once, you know what I mean? But I was like, no, I'll just use this. It's just a nice, pretty color. It dries back a little bit and I'll still be able to write over it, you know, with a ballpoint pen, no problem. So I did that, stamped the insides with that, and then I added another sentiment strip from that same Christmas Wishes pack. So I adhered those to the insides of the cards, folded my cards shut, and then adhered both of these background panels. Again, you could pop this up with some foam tape if you want more dimension, but I just decided to adhere them as is. And then I'm going to pair these cards with some of Simon's metallic schoolhouse red envelopes. So that just, brings in that little bit of red again. So that finished off the cards. I really like how these backgrounds turned out. They were so simple, and yet that variation between the two colors plus, the areas that are a little bit darker, more concentrated and lighter, love it. And then, the sparkly little die cut, and then the, clean and simple Mary word. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. I will have links to everything in the description box below the video. I'll also have a link to my blog post and picture links in my blog post as well, so you can check that out below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!